Diwit e charge e chomerdia agus doine ella e will sum akuan. Hello friends, comrades, and interested others. This is a video that nobody asked for, but I want to make, and I don't even have any notes in front of me, so we're just on this journey together. You may recognize this dress from the video that I made in Grounding in Tradition. I've gained about 40 pounds worth of quarantine weight, and so I augmented it into a pinafore so that I could continue wearing it, and honestly, I'm really happy with the way that it looks now. I've talked pretty frequently in recent videos about the importance of connecting with our ancestors and our traditional cultures and things like that, which is obviously a very fraught and complicated topic, and I'm by no means trying to be prescriptivist in that recommendation so much as I just feel like there is so much discouragement from doing that in mainstream Western secular culture that I think that it's important to kind of like have that like counter encouragement that like honoring our ancestors is important and understanding kind of where we come from and what our traditional cultural practices are is important. Obviously, again, that's not for everyone and not everybody feels drawn to that, but I personally have felt that path to be really important for me, especially over the past few years. And it's something that I'm very, very early on in discovering and working towards and connecting with. And so I'm by no means an expert on this, and I'm sure that there are probably things I'm going to say in this video that a year from now or 5 or 10 years from now I'll be like, oh, it's not how I feel about it anymore. But I still think it's important to just like have the conversation, and I wanted to make a video just talking about my own personal experience with cultural reconnection and ancestral work, and just kind of talking about where I'm at that. So this video is not going to involve any recommendations or homework or anything like that. It's just kind of going to be me talking about my personal experience in hopes that somebody might get something out of that, or at least we can have a conversation about it that might be fruitful. And so, as I've discussed in other videos, I am a settler of English, Irish, and Scottish descent. And so, throughout most of my life, I didn't know a lot about that. My mom actually immigrated to Turtle Island from England when she was a small child. So, on my mom's side of the family, I am first generation from the Isles, also known as the Atlantic Archipelago, also known as the British Isles in colonial language. I personally just use the term the Isles because that is a term that was first introduced to me as the decolonial term. And so if I'm saying the Isles throughout this video, know that I am referring to the section of islands in the Atlantic that is referred to as the British Islands, or the British Isles. But the reason why that I don't like using that language is because obviously Britain is an imperial entity, and not all of the islands that are referred to as the British Isles even are part of the British Empire, or Great Britain. Like Ireland is not part of that, yet there's often still included in the reference to the British Isles, and so that's a term that I generally don't use myself, and I just say the Isles. But yeah, so my mom is a first generation settler from England, and also has like roots in other places there, on the Isles. And my father is a multi-generational settler who, his family has been in so-called Canada for many, many generations, probably 5 or 6 generations in some places, or in some lines. But he is also a person of primarily Scottish, Irish, and English descent. And so that is kind of what I'm exploring, is those roots specifically. And I guess just like talking about the practices that I've been doing to try to like reconnect with that. So, as I've spoken about in previous videos as well, I feel like my first kind of like touch point in wanting to like reconnect with ancestral cultures and practices was actually joining the Anglican Church, because Many people in my family generations back have been Anglican, and also the Anglican Church was just like a really positive community in my personal experience with the specific churches that I was connecting to. So that was kind of like where that work began for me. And I still identify as Anglican and attend church services there and participate in other church work. But I feel like it's something that is a lot deeper than that as well. In the past year, especially, I've been a lot more called to reconnecting with Celtic things and even reconnecting with traditions that predate the Celts on the Isles, like the Picts and things like that. But obviously, we don't have a lot of information about them, and so that has been harder to just even like learn about who those people were. But in so far as what that kind of like reconnection path has looked like for me, I have started learning languages. So, as you kind of heard a bit of in the opening of this, I've been learning a little bit of Gaeilge, which is Irish Gaelic, and I've also learned a little bit of Scots Gaelic, though not as much. Although, to be honest, I haven't learned that much of either. It's a long practice of learning languages, and it's unfortunate that I feel like it's really hard to find people to practice that language with. So I'm mostly just learning like online, and to be honest, I spend a lot of time kind of like talking to inanimate objects. Like I'll like go down to the river and I'll be like, Diawet Ishka, like hello water, and like talk to the water and talk to things like that because I don't have a lot of humans to practice conversing with in those languages. It's really unfortunate that there has been so much like cultural and linguistic loss um, of like Celtic languages or Gaelic languages, I mean, on the Isles and other cultures that predated the Anglo-Saxon arrival on the Isles. Yeah, that's something that I've been kind of grappling with as I'm doing that cultural exploration as well, just really coming to terms with the amount of loss of those cultures and like traditional knowledges and things like that. Yeah, I'll talk about that probably a bit more later in this conversation. One really interesting thing for me about learning Gaelic languages has been learning the etymology of the words, because translating things directly from English to another language is always kind of a sticky thing, because you're kind of learning the word that would be said in a similar social context, but that might not actually have the same root meaning as the English word. So, for example, I don't know, the only thing that really comes to mind off the top of my head is Diawet, which is translated as hello in English equals Diawet in Gaeilge. But Diawet actually means like God to you, um, which is not really the root word of, or like the root meaning of hello, even though they're both greetings. And so that has been an interesting thing, kind of like wanting to dig deeper into understanding what the actual words mean and the kind of ideologies or worldviews that are encompassed in that. A big thing for me has been also like learning traditional crafts. And so I learned how to knit, and honestly, like that has been probably like the biggest deal for me in terms of traditional crafts, because knitting was something that was very present in my childhood. Like my grandmother was an avid knitter and knit me sweaters and stuff like that all the time. So I have really positive memories of knitting being like a practice in my family. And I feel like learning how to knit was a big like, I don't know, like I could just like feel something in my heart or like feel something in my body that I was doing something that was like so old and that had been done in my family for so many generations. And I can't even really like describe what that feels like, to feel like you're like really reconnecting with something that's like in your like ancestry. Like it almost feels sometimes like other people are like moving through you, or other people who are like not in the physical world anymore are like happy with you taking up that practice. So that has actually been, even though knitting seems like such a mundane thing, I feel like it's been a really important aspect of my cultural reconnection journey. I feel like a lot of trying to like re-traditionalize, or I don't even know if that's the right word to use, because to be honest, like I, even though I'm like wearing like a pinafore and things like that, I'm not really interested in like being a larper, I guess, or like I'm not trying to just disconnect myself from the present and create some sort of idealized past that I can like reenact. Because also there is no static ancestry, you know what I mean? Like there's no point that I can like look back to and be like, that is what my ancestry looks like. Like my ancestors have changed their styles of dress and language and cultural practices since time immemorial. So there's no like neat packaged thing that I can like try to replicate and be like, this is what my ancestors were like. So it's it's constantly kind of engaging with like what are ancestral practices or belief systems that have maybe been lost that would be really good for me or good for the world to bring back into the present, and what is just kind of like a special interest thing. I don't think that everybody needs to, you know, learn how to make Rivlin shoes or things like that, but it's just something that I find very interesting. But I feel like a lot of it too has been learning stories. Like learning stories is something that I only started to do in the past few months, and I feel like it has like exploded my brain in realizing, even though through colonialism and things like that, culture from the Isles and culture from Europe in general has become pretty hegemonic. Learning stories that are not specifically Christian stories has made me realize like how little I actually know about traditional narratives and stories and archetypes and mythos like from my ancestry. So that has been really, really enlightening. A book that I've been reading right now that I've plugged in other videos is Scottish Myths and Legends by Daniel Allison. That book has been really just so heart opening for me, and I really recommend it to anybody who is interested in stories. I feel like something else that has also been a really complicated experience or emotion to kind of deal with in this is that I feel like you can't really get very far in wanting to reconnect to a culture, reconnect to a, you know, pre-Christianized culture without having to deal with grief, really. Like without really having to grapple with the amount of cultural loss and language loss and things like that. I remember when I started reading this book by Daniel Allison, there was an opening line or something like that. There was a thing that was said in the introduction about how traditional Scottish stories are not taught in Scotland and how they all study kind of Greek and Roman myths, and that the line, you know, what did the Romans ever do for us from Monty Python is something that was frequently said in Scottish schools. And that actually made me so sad that I kind of had to like step away from it for a while, to understand that there in the Isles today, and for the past hundreds and thousands of years, there has been so much idolization and idealization of Roman conquest of the Isles, and not really an appreciation for how much cultural loss and how much spiritual and human destruction came from the Roman conquest of the British Isles. And sometimes I'll speak to people who are from the Isles and they'll be so proud to say that they have Roman ancestry, and that has been like really just like mind boggling for me, I guess, to like realize the ongoing impact of that and how much impact it has had on the culture of the Isles for the past like 2000 years ish. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's something that I feel hesitant to talk about because I would never want to equivocate my ancestral experience of um, conquest or Christianization or cultural loss to the experiences of colonized peoples who have had that experience under British and Scottish and Irish occupation of their lands. So I don't want to bring up this grief in a way to equivocate or whitewash or something like that, like my experience versus the experiences of people who have been colonized by my own ancestors or relatives. But I feel like, yeah, there definitely is like a big grief in there that has to be kind of dealt with. That there is like so much loss, and I feel like, I don't know, I feel like maybe that grief exists in an undercurrent or something in settlers from the Isles and in people who live on the Isles today that is not really like grappled with. But I remember listening to an interview of this one Welsh storyteller, and she was talking about how we do have many stories that are traditional and pre-Christian stories from the Isles, and many of them were recorded by monks, by early Christian monks, and so those stories have been Christianized and augmented in a lot of ways. But the ones that we don't have are creation stories, and our, like, those were the stories that were not allowed to continue existing and that were not recorded or passed on, were Celtic and other creation stories from the Isles. And I feel like when I heard that and heard the kind of grief in her voice around that, like that really impacted me. And even like I've had situations where I'll get really, I feel like myself getting emotional about it, even just talking about it now. To not have a creation story, I feel like is such a powerful form of cultural loss and cosmological loss in a people that does brings up a lot of grief and sadness for me. And so I don't want to just kind of be talking about cultural reconnection as if it's like a super easy thing that everybody should do and is like a purely positive experience, because I feel like for any people, regardless of who you are, digging into that involves dealing with grief and dealing with loss and dealing with the understanding that you don't have all of those knowledges and you don't have all those worldviews, and you're in a lot of cases just kind of working with bits and pieces from what remains and trying to like piece together some sense of it to inform your life moving forward. So um yeah, I feel like that has been the hardest element of this, is coming to terms with the amount that has been lost, and that there are certain knowledges that we can't go back to because they don't exist anymore. I just hope through, through coming together collectively, I guess, and through visioning and through community, we're kind of able to build from what we do have, because these stories do come out organically from community. And I think that it's not like a hopeless thing, but it is just a very sad thing to realize that you like come from a people that doesn't have a creation story. I feel like another thing that I struggle with, and I think a lot of settlers on Turtle Island deal with, is that we're not the same people as our ancestors who were from those places. And I feel like that is a very fraught topic or idea, and not something that I have an answer to, and not something that I know anyone who has an answer to. But I am not a Irish person. I'm not a Scottish person. I'm not an English person. And I hesitate to say that I'm Canadian because I don't even think that Canada should exist. So I'm a settler. I'm a white person. I'm a person whose ancestors were from these cultures, but I exist in a different social reality, in a different cultural reality, and a different land than these ancestors did. And so I don't want to, and it would be impossible to analogize my experience to say I'm a Scottish person or I'm an Irish person, because I'm not. And like, I'm of those people, but I'm not those people. And I feel like it is maybe just one of the tasks of my life to grapple with that. And the same is true of many settlers, to figure out who we are now on these lands, and not just kind of identify or equivocate our experiences to those of our relatives who are living in other places, because I do feel like we have been deeply changed by our status as settlers on this land, and we've been deeply changed by the land, and we've been deeply changed by our interactions with people of other cultures and our relationships with indigenous people. Like, that is something that we're not gonna go back. We're not gonna go back to being Scottish people or Irish people or English people or French or German or any other kind of people. Um, we kind of just have to sit with the the knowledge and understanding that we are different people now by being here, and kind of try to grapple with and figure out what that means through a lens of social justice and wanting to prioritize decolonization. I guess I just bring that up as a problemed thought or idea, but I don't. That's not something that I have reconciled at all, nor do I really expect that I will at any point in my life. But I just think it's an important thing to emphasize that we're not trying to reconnect the past, or say that we are the same people as our ancestors, because we're every generation kind of becomes different. And I want to have my life as it is today informed by and rooted in relationship to my ancestors and understanding of those cultures, and to be able to embody some elements of that as I feel is good for me and is good for the world and is good for my ancestors. But I don't want to kind of claim a lived experience that I don't have, and that is complicated. It's a complicated balance, or a complicated path to navigate. I feel like so much of Western secular thought and scientism and colonial thought, and ultimately just like whiteness and the ideologies that accompany whiteness, are embedded in so much denial of self and denial of spirit and denial of ancestry, that even aside from from kind of trying to identify specific practices or things like that to connect with, I feel like a lot of my work has just been trying to shed some of the like psychic dust or like psychic weight of living in a colonial society and living in a capitalist society. That, like, for example, I'm gonna kind of get vulnerable in this video, but I've had very, very vivid dreams for my whole life. And it's something that, like, I can remember dreams that I had as a child that were really impactful, and just dreams that I've had throughout my whole life. And they've always been so visually intense and so narratively intense, that I've always kind of had this like secret feeling that my dreams were like as important as my waking life, or that things that happened to me or experiences that I had in my dreams really informed the shaping of my personality. And it wasn't until very, very recently in my life, like the recent past maybe 3 or 4 years, that I have actually held any space for that, and really started thinking about my dreams and meditating on them and respecting them as like a valid form of insight. And since I started listening to my dreams, I've received more of them, and there's been more clarity in them. Like, I've received very, very specific messages in dreams, and even lines of poetry, and very, very essential guidance through my dreams that I did to some extent before, but I it really took on a new shape or a new form of intensity when I started allowing that, and just like making a lot of room for it in my life and my mind and my heart. And so that has been, even though I don't know if many people in my family are like dreamers or like care about things like that feels like a form of kind of cultural reconnection or ancestral reconnection as well, regardless of how far back that might be stretching, to just like honor my dreams and honor my like spiritual knowledge and intuition, and not kind of let, I don't know, Western hegemonic thinking tell me that dreams don't mean anything, or that there isn't like a spiritual world or life that like has impact on the material world. And so I feel self-conscious talking about that, and especially having an audience that is primarily like leftist. I feel like there's a lot of like skepticism and like rationalism and atheism and stuff like that on the left that makes me feel self-conscious discussing my actual spiritual beliefs and experiences. But I want to be open about that, and I feel like part of the work that I'm doing too is just trying to fight that cringe factor of like, oh, I can't talk about this because it's so out there or it's not normal. Like I need to fight that in myself because I want to create a world in which that is a thing that people can discuss as valuable. And if I act like my own experiences are not valid, then I'm kind of reinforcing a world in which other people feel like their spiritual experiences are not valid. And I'm just tired of doing that. And so, yeah, dreams are something that has been really, really important to me. And plants, like plant medicines as well, have been incredibly important teachers on this path of just trying to reconnect with spirit and ancestry and the world. Like, even though I'm kind of talking about this through the land of ancestry and culture, I feel like really when it comes down to it, it's not just about that. And it's not just some sort of like genealogical experiment. Like, it's kind of like I view it as all being part of the same thing of reconnecting with land, reconnecting with other human beings in this life, reconnecting with spirit, reconnecting with kind of my role in the world, whatever that is. And honoring my ancestors has been, or beginning to try to learn how to honor my ancestors has been an important part of just that overall, like, broad reaching reconnection practice. And so other things that I've been doing, I guess, have been, yeah, reconnecting with plants has been a big one, like learning about traditional plant medicines from the Isles, as well as medicine plants that grow here. I have a particular fascination, I think, with plants that have native relatives both on Turtle Island and on the Isles, because the Isles is pretty much where all of my ancestors are from. Like, I have a few ancestors from like other places in Europe, but the vast bulk of my ancestry is just from the Isles. But I grew up here, and like my body has been formed on this land, as complicated as that is. And so finding those plant relatives that are growing here where I live that have relatives or variations that also grow on the Isles, I feel like are the plants that I feel the most connected to. So things like blackberries and strawberries and lots of plants actually have different relatives or variations that grow both on Turtle Island and on the Isles. Hazelnut's another big one. There's a native mugwort here. It's actually usually referred to as ragweed, but it is a mugwort relative. So plants like that have been really important to me in grounding and reconnection, and also just trying to embrace a practice and a worldview of reciprocity. So I really try, I'm not perfect, but I really try not to take anything from the land without giving something back. So I usually carry some form of offering with me depending on what I have. Um, Sometimes it's a mix of medicine, sometimes it's just food or water or um, special little things to me, but I try not to take things from the land without kind of giving something back. Even if it's just in the form of care, like I try to fertilize the plants that I harvest from or help them like spread their seeds or things like that. And yeah, I feel like that's just been part of trying to like move back into a relationship of understanding that like other living things are beings, you know what I mean? And in that, I've also noticed a change in the way that I even talk about other beings in the world that are not humans. And so, without even really realizing it, I feel like I've gone from referring to plants, for example, like as its or as objects, to saying like they, and like using actual pronouns for them. And that's not something that I think I started doing intentionally, but it's definitely been, I think, a reflection, or it's like moved in hand with trying to build that relationship of reciprocity with just like all the beings that I'm in relationship with. Another thing that's been really important to me is just like paying attention to the natural cycles and trying to like do little things to celebrate like the solar cycles as well as the lunar cycles, and honoring how that shapes my life. Like, I am somebody who is neurodivergent in the kind of like Western psychiatric model, and I've been diagnosed with a mood disorder and other things. And so I feel like I've learned a lot about my own cycles through the cycles of the sky and plants and things like that. Like, I know that, the moon goes through periods of like fullness and rest, and plants go through periods of growing and blooming and then having fallow periods. So I feel like I've like allowed myself to have my own cycles of activity and rest through following those natural cycles. And yeah, I feel like I just want to bring the world around me into those experiences of celebration. Like, the solstices have always been a big thing for me. Like, I try to do something to celebrate the solstice with the people around me and the land, and setting intention and doing other spiritual work on those days. And this past year, I celebrated the solstice with my partner and my brother, and I feel like that was a really powerful experience because I'd never done ritual with my living family before. We celebrate Christian holidays, like Christmas and Easter and things like that, but we've never celebrated non-Christian holidays or like cycles together. So that was cool to be able to do that with a living family member. And speaking of living family, I feel like that has been a big part of this for me as well. I have been forming a family tree, as far as the genealogical stuff goes, and I have not actually spent a lot of time or like had very deep relationships with my living grandparents in my adult life. And so I feel like wanting to do this work has also made me want to have more active relationships with my living relatives, who are still here on the earth, because I can learn so much from them. And that, like, even though I said I wasn't going to recommend anything, if I could recommend something, it would be that. Like, if you have a grandmother that you don't usually talk to, or like some older living relatives that you don't usually talk to, that you would feel comfortable kind of spending more time with or having conversations with. I've learned so much about my family and kind of like put the pieces together about how I'm here and why I am the way I am by learning about my family, like as far back as I could track that. So spending time and having conversations and hearing the stories of living relatives has been important. And I don't want to congratulate myself on that, because honestly, I've only had like a few sit down conversations with living relatives about that. And it's something that I still want to do a lot of work on and be really intentional about. And I'm actually thinking of maybe interviewing some of my living family and like writing down, or at least like audio recording some of their stories, because I feel like that's really important, both for me to kind of like flesh out my understanding of them as people, and by extension to flesh out my understanding of my own life, but also just to pass down to generations, because I feel like there has been a real lack of recording family history, family narrative, and stories and things like that. That even though I can kind of look back a few generations and see the names and maybe the nationalities of some of my relatives, I don't really know who they were as people. And I want to kind of start moving forward with saving some of that information, so that when my descendants or anybody who like is coming after me and our family looks back, they can actually have more of an idea of who those people were as people. Making sure that you're calling in relationships with people who are relatively healthy and who are good intentioned and who are kind people, because obviously in anybody's ancestry, and especially, you know, those of us who are European settlers, a lot of our ancestry is not great. Like a lot of our ancestors are colonizers and things like that, and it's important to be accountable to that. Like, I'm not trying to erase that or distance myself from it, but I'm saying in my own like well-being and personal practices and trying to like make sure that my heart is intact so that I'm moving good things forward. I don't want to be nurturing active relationships with ancestors who were potentially harmful or not kind of healed in and of themselves. And I don't want to kind of glorify all of my ancestry as being like perfect people or something. So it's been useful and enlightening for me to learn about which of my ancestors were viewed as being really kind and generous people, and then kind of choosing to honor those ancestors through spiritual practices and leaving offerings and things like that. And I'm actually choosing to take my great great grandmother's surname because she was known as being a very, very kind person, and I've heard probably better things about her unanimously in my family than I have about any other recently departed relative, and so I've chosen to give myself her surname as a way of honoring her. So that's kind of like some examples, I guess, of practices that have been helpful for me, and also just kind of where my mind is at in doing this work right now. I hope that watching this video wasn't alienating to anybody in any way. Like, if you're watching this and you're just like, that doesn't resonate with me, that's not something I'm interested in, then that is your path, and that's like totally fine. I'm not trying to make this video to be prescriptivist about how anybody should go about connecting or not connecting with their relatives or with any other cultural connection that they feel, whether that is through ancestry or adoption or other relationship. Another thing that's been really important to me, which is something that I've been doing since before I started this cultural reconnection journey, is solidarity work, obviously. And so I don't feel like it's okay to just kind of like sit in my home and think about my ancestors and learn languages and things like that and then be like, I'm decolonizing myself. I don't know if I even feel comfortable using that language, although I know that there are other people who do use that language, but um, I think that decolonization, if we are going to use that, is very much about a mending of relationships and a rectifying of injustice, not just a form of personal work that we do in and of ourselves, and then consider that to kind of be enough. This is work that I'm doing for myself to really ground myself and heal myself and make sure that I am well enough to care for other people and to put out good things into the world. But I definitely don't see it as the beginning and end of my practice. And I think that working in solidarity with Indigenous people and working towards decolonization and showing up to support land back is really, really, really essentially important. And so I just wanted to like emphasize that I'm not talking about this as if the personal practice is the be all and end all, because I think as well that if we're going to be trying to honor our ancestors, part of that is also being accountable to the harm that many of our ancestors did, and the fact that we are currently living, like, if you're a settler anyway, you're currently living in a situation where you're benefiting from harm that has been done by your ancestors. And even if you're somebody who's arrived here relatively recently, there's still been harm done in the past that you're currently benefiting from. And so we need to rectify that, and it's an important and essential part of ancestral work to rectify historical. And I think that my wisest and kindest and most benevolent ancestors would appreciate the fact that that is a priority and would feel honored by that being a priority in my life and in other people's lives today. Guru Ma'agat for joining me today, and I want to conclude this video by actually reading a poem that I wrote. I feel a bit self-conscious about doing that, but I hope that you will appreciate it. The poem is called Children of My Children. I wonder if there will be some child of my children, hundreds of years from now, speaking my name to claim, valorize, or absolve. Will I be painted in my wire and plastic house, a stoic ancestor of old? Will they don tattered jeans and flannel to role-play on festive occasions? Will they build souvenir towns full of dirty bus stops? Or does this practice only exist here, in this time outside of time, this land outside of land, where we grasp desperately for the hand of a mother that might stretch forth to claim us from before we forgot how to be in the world? I hope that the children of my children will know who they are, will know the land and those they share it with, and move with the cycles. I hope their hearts will be tied with so many threads, and I just a thin strand in the rich tangle of their lives. Thanks for joining me today. I hope that this video was a good watching experience. Thanks for listening to me share my own personal thoughts and experiences about my life and how that extends back and forth from me. And yeah, if you liked this video or you like my other videos, please like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, all those things. And you can support me through donating to my Patreon. That really, really helps, to be honest, keep this channel going, as well as just help me live a life. A reminder that anybody who joins my Patreon for any amount gets access to my Discord, where you can talk with me and other subscribers, and I will sometimes send out polls or previews of YouTube videos before they go up on the channel. So donating for any amount really helps me, and you do get real benefits from it. I hope you have a lovely day, and I will see you next time. Peace out. I'd like to give a special shout out to Duke of Fall and Opting Out for joining my Patreon.